Hello, welcome everybody to another edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. As many of you will know, I've been intrigued and fascinated by both the UFO phenomenon, the abduction phenomenon, and indeed the overlaps that these phenomena have with human consciousness, the near-death experience, and various other areas. For many years, I thought I was very lonely brow in terms of this, in that I thought I was probably one of the few people linking these together. I know the work of people like Janet Colli. I'm aware of the work of various other individuals. John Keel also leads to mind with his books Project Trojan Horse, Janet Colli with his books Passport to Magonia. But I was delighted to discover recently a researcher and writer called Dr. Janet Colli, who has been taking these areas on board and taking them to some fascinating areas. And I was delighted when Janet agreed to be to joining us on this show. I have to say that we have had a considerable amount of Archon attacks today. Unbelievable. I wouldn't even want to go into details about how bad they have been today. But the sheer tenacity and a series of furtive transatlantic emails, we've managed to get together. Now, Janet's work, I was interested when Janet sent one of her, some of her questions. She said that I've been called the female John Mack, and I thought, wow, that is a fantastic accolade. Now, what we're going to do in Take This Talk is we're going to go into some very interesting areas here because there's a massive area of overlap. I'm just going to read some details about Janet. Janet earned her master's degree in Western Analytical Philosophy at Ohio State University and Claremont Graduate School. Her interests veered to Benjamin Wolf's hypothesis that Indo-European languages shape our view of reality, the effects of language deprivation on brain development in feral and severely neglected children, and the mystic's ineffable or worldly interior silence. The reason I'm intrigued on that, Janet, is that I have been a huge fan of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis since I was at university back in the mid-1970s. And it's the first time I've seen anybody reference this. And I got so excited. So before we even start, can we just have a quick chat about that? Because I'm really intrigued on how you're applying the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis to these things. So maybe you can give a little bit of background to the Sapir. Well, no. Firstly, tell us a little bit about yourself, so the listeners know who you are and what your interests are. And then we'll go into the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.
Okay, well, at that point, being in analytical philosophy, I was not yet in psychology full time. And so now I'm a clinician. I'm a psychotherapist now. So coming from the more abstract realms, looking at the conceptual framework of language and how it affects our experience, I actually, through my own spiritual emergency with cancer, was drawn to work on a very personal level with people with their own experience of transformation. So I've kind of gone from the more theoretical to the one-on-one work, and now, of course, teaching some, but one-on-one psychotherapeutic work with people as they go through this transformational process and break through what you might look at as the constraints of what language and the collective has entrained our brain to be able to perceive or to see. So I'm taking people beyond that, breaking through paradigms, and that's how it turns out we evolve. Okay, so there's a mouthful. So now I'm a psychotherapist, and can you hear me? Did you get that?
Yeah. Oh yes. Don't hear you. Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so I've been working as a psychotherapist for over 20 years, and I knew from the start I wanted to work with people who had close encounters, because there isn't anything that, in my opinion, that is more shattering and yet evokes evolution more than interspecies communication. So I was able to do that, and I've been doing that for 20 years, and I can't think of anything more fascinating. So
neither can I have to say. Can you tell us a little bit then about your work in this area, because one of the, well, I mean, for instance, I can cite a case about my own mother recently as well, which you may be interested in, because
okay.
I'm trying to draw links between alien encounters in my next book and Bonnet syndrome. You know Bonnet syndrome. Okay.
Oh, spell that, please.
Bonnet, Bonnet syndrome. It was put together by a guy called Charles Bonnet, and it is to do with people who have declining eyesight, who see visions or see small children. Okay. Now, Bonnet syndrome has been known for quite a long time, and I think I'm one of the first writers that actually drew in conclusions that we could link Bonnet syndrome with the alien abduction thing. Now, the reason I say this is that about 3 years ago, my mother, before she started developing Alzheimer's, and I think there's a link here with Alzheimer's as well, is that she saw a UFO hovering over a factory near where she lived. That evening, now she knows nothing about UFOs, she's never been involved in the UFO phenomena or anything else. She wakes up that night, in the middle of the night, she wakes up and she's in a state of sleep paralysis. You know, she's in a REM intrusion state. As she does so, she looks over to the bedroom door to see a set of very, very spindly fingers come round the door, and a creature come round the door, and she described it and said it had huge black eyes, 2 little nostrils, and a slit for a mouth. And it saw me, and it dodged back. Now, she's a widow, lives on her own, so when she phoned me up, I calmed her down, and I said, no, Mum, you know, it's obviously just a dream. But for me, it was far more than a dream. She sees a UFO, and then she has a REM intrusion of a grey, you know, which intrigues me. So moving on. So, go on.
Why would you say that was just a dream?
Well, I don't.
That's interesting.
No, I believe. No, not at all. I believe that in the hypnagogic state.
Right. Yeah.
You know, to me.
I'm just wondering. That's one of the. I'm just wondering about the intervention there. And so you say that this was before she was coming down with Alzheimer's?
Correct. It was the early signs of Alzheimer's. It was something that was starting. And then I have discovered that people who, in the early stages of Alzheimer's, do actually have occasions of Bonnet syndrome. And in fact, I had to tell the physician that what my mother had was Bonnet syndrome, because afterwards she was saying she was seeing children or little people following her around. They were everywhere. And clearly, this, to me, this links precisely to your work.
How do we know? How do we know she isn't? You know, how do we know that she hasn't broken through to another dimensional reality, and it's just being pathologized, right? With these, so I'm not sure about the Alzheimer's at all, and I've never heard of the Bonnet syndrome, but we have a great history in psychology and psychiatry of pathologizing people who have broken through to another dimensional reality, or who are seeing things outside of our, ordinary cultural constructs. So it's very tricky here. I'm not going to try to do anything with the diagnoses here, because I haven't met your mother, but we do have a great history of pathologizing. And one of the hardest things is when people are told that these things aren't happening, that their experiences are delusional or simply nightmares, right? And that's a terrible, makes it a lot harder for them to negotiate the reality, okay, and to find their way with it. If the whole cultural, if the culture denies it. So I, okay, can you hear me now still?
Yeah, no, hear you fine. You're coming across fine. So as an aside question on this, what's your thoughts on the linking here of these phenomena to DMT? for instance, the work of Rick Strassman and his associates?
Oh, yeah, well, sure. Okay, so you're going to have multiple ways. If these realities are, I'll just say objectively real, if they're not pinned to one particular, psyche, if they're real, then we should have multiple accesses to them. And some of the entheogens or substances that have been known since indigenous times, as well as more pure versions, such as DMT, are just accesses, different accesses to these other realities, other dimensions, and otherworldly beings. So I think you get somewhat of a different. You might get some differences, whether, depending on the access, on the route that you're taking. But I think at this point, to think that we're alone in the universe is a pretty uneducated and view. And so, so it's very nice if you can have some kind of a clinical setting in which you can virtually ensure that people are going to be entering realms that have commonality between the subjects. Okay, now that's a fantastic controlled setting. The people I'm working with in my practice have willy-nilly have been chosen, but then if you look at the lineage, generally it will follow the line in their family. So I'm curious about your mother now. If she's seeing a being, I would always be looking at, have you being in the direct line. If she has that capability or has opened up to that, then, I wouldn't be surprised if you would as well at some point. Or so anyway, that's kind of a personal observation, but.
Okay, well, going back, we've deflected slightly onto me and my family, and because I think it's important to get that across. But I'm now keen to know more about your clinical experience in the sense of when did you first become involved in talking to people who had abductions? I mean, how did that set of circumstances come about? Because it's not something that you would naturally move into. But how did that happen?
Well. Natural to me, I would say. The one of the classic books I read, The Betty Andreasson Affair, is what my partner Thomas Beck, now Dr. Beck, and I read when we were in college, when we were at university. And so that was one of the things that we read that was very clearly had to do with mystical experience, authentic mystical experience. And we at that point decided, we wanted to research and study it. And so later on, after I had my experience with cancer, which was my own transformative initiation, then I went back to graduate school in psychology, and in school as a graduate student, I started a group. We put an ad in the paper calling for people who would like to be a part of a group, people that had some kind of close encounter or UFO experience, and so we formed a support group. Back in graduate school, and we started to go to a local UFO group, the MUFON group in Seattle, and there, I was to meet a person who became the subject of my first book, Sacred Encounters, and so we started back in graduate school. We knew it was authentic and could lead to mystical experience, and we wanted to know more, and we wanted to work with people. So we made it happen. I mean, I don't know. I don't know of any other way to live. Is you just go after it, and then as we've worked with people, our own experiences started to come into focus. So that's another phenomenon. Is like that you kind of look at is some of the researchers themselves, or let me see, the man, Raymond Fowler, who actually was the researcher for Betty Andreasson. He later was to uncover his own, in his own lineage and in himself, some very extraordinary experiences. So we felt called. We have felt called all along. We've had to get a credential, and we've had to have training. Training in trauma has been very, very critical, because so many people do have a sense of difficulty and of having been traumatized. We don't even use at this point, though, the words alien abduction. We don't view them. We don't like to limit it by that terminology. So I try to say close encounters, for example. Bringing people through the traumatic aspects and to the other side of it. And if you look at people like they did a Harvard study of experiencers that John Mack kind of helped with, but he helped to put them in touch with experiencers. But even the people that have been traumatized say, by and large, that they would not have gone through it because of the great growth that is engendered by it. So, do you have any questions? Any other?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just fascinating listening to this. So in terms of some of the cases that you've been involved in and the individuals who have had encounters, are you at liberty to share one or two with us, the ones that you found the most intriguing and the most interesting? Yeah, it looks like a fantastic book. I'm trying to get a hold of a copy. This is the book, folks. This is the book.
Oh, great.
Yes, I'm trying to get a hold of the copy. Go on.
Okay, Sacred Encounters, Spiritual Awakenings During Close Encounters. There are two major cases in that book. And it's interesting, although I did that book some years ago, I just now re-interviewed the first subject in it. Haley is her pseudonym, and I've interviewed her because in the meantime she's gone back to school and now has a master's degree in psychology herself and wants to help other experiencers. And she's had encounters throughout her life, but the interview was focusing on the spiritual emergency or the transformational crisis that she went through and the integration process that she has gone through her entire life to be able to integrate these experiences into her normal waking consciousness and to be able to talk about and share her relationship with these beings, with people in our culture. And so the interview, I'd like to put in a new book about spiritual emergency. And so there's the processing of the experiences, which may be traumatic, and in which, you're going to go into deeper altered states. And you want to have a very safe container, for that to, work through. And I, recommend a couple of, tools for that, in psychology. They're used widely in psychology with trauma, or to access deeper altered states. And then there's the integration process where you have to take these deep altered state experiences and relate them to the rest of your life and be able to talk about them with other people. And that is a really tall order in a culture that is largely in denial. Okay, and we don't fluidly, our consciousness is yet we have great difficulty going into these altered states and coming back and being able to tell a narrative, to move out of a place where we feel out of control and victimized and move into a place where we recognize our relationship with these beings and recognize their role in our evolution. So
in terms of Haley's experience, can you share with us roughly what happened to Haley?
Yeah. Okay. Well, Haley, and this is part of, so I'm going to look up here just a few notes here from the interview. What was very interesting is that Haley, starting from about the age of 2, when she first remembers seeing the being, typical bald head, big-eyed alien in her study at home, and then being taken, and ending up, flat on her back with a couple of beings hovering over her, and some silver tracers from instruments, passing over her head, and then waking up, on the sofa in the study the next morning and being told by her mother that it was a dream, so coming from that and then having numerous experiences of being taken and being impacted, okay, and so she didn't view it as a UFO at all. At first it was, she just thought it was monsters. As a small child, right, that's what you do. That's how you frame it. And then it went to giant white rabbits, right, that would take her, and she'd be placed along with other children, and they would be taught things, and that would be kind of a friendly experience. And then as she grew older, she thought of these beings as her spirit guides. Okay, so she, at this point in the collective, there wasn't a lot about UFOs. This is before Whitley Strieber's groundbreaking book, Communion. And so she went through several iterations of explaining to herself, trying to make sense of it herself without having anybody to help her with it, or nothing in the collective as yet. Now, when she saw the cover to Communion, if you remember the cover, it's an artistic rendition of a great big eyes, bald head, and she looked at that cover and she pretty much went into shock. And she said, "What's my spirit guide doing on the cover of this book?" So she had to go through all these iterations of trying to explain this to herself, and then having to process, is this evil, on top of it, because she had been raised Catholic. And so she would be brought to a round white room, is what she remembers, and sometimes a helmet would come down over her head, and she would receive images and lessons that got increasingly more symbolic as she got older. And she, for a long time, felt, that these were her guides, okay? And so for her, she didn't start to relate this to ufology or UFOs until her 20s. And so then she had to put all these pieces together. She met John Mack, she met Bud Hopkins, so she was meeting some of the big names in ufology, and she yet could not reconcile it with her own experience. So this just shows you how the human mind, and she became very adept at dissociation, because she couldn't reconcile it with what she wanted to live a soap opera life. She wanted to be normal. And yet she was having, this whole phenomenon impact her and create in her, she'd had out-of-body experiences, She didn't have a near-death experience, but she was having out-of-body experiences, and she later started to do a training in out-of-body work to try to gain mastery or control over this, over what was happening to her. And that's an important step, to move from a sense of victimization to some sense of control. So I should take a break and if you ask if you have any questions at this point.
Yeah, there's lots of things that were leaping to my mind there. Effectively, I'm always being very intrigued. It's amazing stuff, and it's so much I relate to in terms of the work you're doing, because the things you were relating to there, I was immediately realizing the symbolism of the rabbits seems to me to be very, very strange. It's almost I recently watched and did an interview on Donnie Darko, the movie, and the idea of the puka, the idea of the spirit, the Irish spirit. Now, if you look at the puka, and I know somebody calls it leprology or leperology, to do with the symbolism of rabbits within this. Now, if we take this back to Alice in Wonderland, the symbol of the rabbit there, we then carry it forward to the symbol. I know, and it's all, I think it is possibly to do with DMT release, it is possibly to do with a lot of things. Now, interestingly enough, one of the people that's been on this show comparatively recently is an American artist by the name of Myron Dial. And Myron has temporal lobe epilepsy and manifested temporal lobe epilepsy from early childhood. Now, effectively, everything that you listen to about what happened to Myron very much fills the typology of there's a term they now use for these mythical friends that children have. And I believe what's happening here is the communication channels between the right and left hemisphere of the brain is not more open, because the corpus callosum doesn't effectively come into effect fully until somebody is around about 9 or 10. So effectively what is happening, they have bicameral minds. So we're taking the Julian Jaynes idea of the bicameral mind, the voices and everything else that people hear. So there's a huge amount of resonance here in terms of this. I'm also reminded of the TV series Taken. Did you remember the TV series Taken that Steven Spielberg did?
Yes, I do. Very good.
And your work, go on.
Yeah, which, if you remember, part of it took place in Seattle. And they had a psychotherapist leading a support group with my hairstyle, and I always thought, oh no, this is somebody's looking in. But anyway, because Haley very much identified with that little girl who was the star. Dakota Fanning was the actress, and she identified very much with that little girl. Beautiful blonde girl, who was said to be, she was going to be the one chosen to help evolve the species or be taken, right? And so, yes, all these things that are floating around in the collective, well, you know what? They've got origins in our very real lives of individuals. You mentioned Julian Jaynes, the corpus callosum. One of the processing techniques I use is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, in which you do bilateral stimulation between the right and the left areas of the brain, and that helps you to process trauma. And so this is one of the most widely used techniques in psychology today for trauma, and that's what I can use with experiencers, because if you have something that the right brain can't process, that's where trauma is, the intense feeling states are held. The way to process it is to keep the material going back and forth between the right and the left hemisphere. So that's actually, very, very good. You're mentioning that. And the corpus callosum can be, with developmental trauma, it can it can be stunted or not fully developed if you have too much trauma early in life. They found that. And so there's ways that we need to, be cognizant about brain development when we deal with these things. And as far as temporal lobe epilepsy, it's like early on when Haley was very invested in finding alternative explanations, right, which is what pretty much everybody goes through. They would rather it not be true. She visited a neuropsychiatrist here in town, and he looked at that possibility for her. Did she have temporal lobe epilepsy, right? Well, it turned out no, but he still offered to medicate her so that it would medicate away the experiences. And she said, no, thank you. So it's very interesting. Now we have enough knowledge about neuroscience that we can start to link brain scans with these experiences and pretty much know what trauma research has told us for 100 years now is that people are not making these things up. If you have this intense emotion that leads to PTSD, you're not getting that by watching television. You're not getting that by fantasizing.
Well, it's one of these things, isn't it? It's one of these things, isn't it? What tends to happen here is labeling is taking place in the sense that we feel because we define it as being an hallucination, therefore we have explained it. Well, of course we haven't. All we've done is we've given the explanation a label. Now, if you start looking at this, and we need to touch into this a little bit later on as we proceed, but effectively these things are Jungian archetypes that have been around for centuries. The imagery, if you look at the imagery of the classic grey, and then you look at the imagery of the elf, you look at the work of people like Patrick Harper, you look at Jacques Vallée and his idea of Passport to Magonia. We have these symbols that have been going on for centuries. And then I know you do this as well, and I do it in my writing. You link this now to the shamanic tradition and the idea of shamanism, the finding of the spirit guide. So here we have DMT, we have the corpus callosum, we have so many issues. Now, in terms of your own opinion of the classic archetypal grey image, what do you think? What do you think that really is? What is that telling us about the human condition and the human mind? What your experience, because you're very experienced in this, and I'm really genuinely keen to have your opinion on what you think is happening here.
Oh well, the humanoid or bipedal phenotype is pretty ubiquitous. First of all, but I don't view these just as archetypal imagery from the collective unconscious. I do believe these beings have that they're objectively real. So I, quite frankly, I don't. I can't say where they're from exactly, but I do think the beings themselves are real, are physically real. And so it's not surprising to me that we would have a lot in our artwork through the ages, or even cave drawings, or stories from folklore. All of this is not surprising to me, but I do think they have a very physically real genesis. I don't think we're alone in the universe as a species. I think we are being we're right now we're being impacted in I don't want to use the word invaded at all, but it is time that the veils of perception be either opened or cleansed, at least cleansed, to allow for interspecies communication. But what that involves is generally quite disturbing to the human psyche and to our cultural structures. And so the few individuals that go through this, like Haley, well, she was basically told that we were undergoing a species shift, and that shift would progress through individuals like herself. What the process or dynamic she's gone through will spread like a wave because we're all connected. It would spread through the species and allow for us to be open, to communication with less trauma. Okay, so I have individuals such as those I outline in my book. I hold them with great respect and am privileged to communicate with them and to, if I can be of some service in helping to facilitate their process. So yes, they definitely have an archetypal connection, but from my perspective, these are species that are, have had a role in our own evolution and continue to play a role in our evolution. The word that Haley came up with during the phrase she came up with during our interview, if I can just access it for a minute, is this is an evolutionary injection. We are being interacted with, and it will advance our evolution as a result.
I'm very fascinated by the idea that we sort of are confusing things here, I think, in the sense that we're assuming that because these entities are somehow intradimensional, for want of a better term, that they can actually manifest within our subconscious, that they're somehow therefore a creation of the subconscious rather than they are influencing the subconscious to come through.
Right.
And very much I'm intrigued by, for instance, the idea of the way people, when they take ayahuasca, the way in which you have the symbolism of the snakes within ayahuasca, the way the symbolism goes right back to DNA. And is this a kind of manifestation of DNA and DNA communicating with us? That there are so many areas here of massive, massive overlap. And I think this is why I'm delighted to make contact with you, because it is clear that you know very little about my work, and I've only recently been introduced to your work. But I think effectively, rather like I'm discovering with lots of other researchers around the world, we're all going up the mountain by different paths, but the destination is going to be the same. And I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a meeting of us guys, and we're just going to go, you know this, I know that. It's like a huge Venn diagram. And in the middle is going to be the solution. But the solution may not be the solution we want,
Well, for years now, I've wanted ufology and to open up to what transpersonal psychology, right, is the transpersonal psychology and knowing about altered states and non-ordinary realities and methodologies to work with these altered states in a healing way. As with Stanislav Grof's holotropic breath work is a wonderful technique, a wonderful technology for accessing deep altered states in a beneficial and healing way. And so from ufology to transpersonal psychology is like we have to learn from each other, as well as ufology and near-death studies. It's like I've tried to bring these two together. And then within psychology itself, we have clinical psychology, which looks at things as more, disease states or readily pathologizes, to bring that together with transpersonal psychology that looks at sacred or mystical and non-ordinary experience. And so the heart of healing, as I say, can be engendered by trauma. But there's an evolutionary dynamic within the human brain, the human psyche, that will take all of these things that will bring higher order consciousness as a result of trauma. Now that's fascinating to me, and that's what I rely on with my work with close encounter experiencers, as well as, you know, anybody that would be working with something as mundane as a panic attack or OCD, obsessional compulsive disorder. It turned out to be portals to higher consciousness. So I think, you know, what you're saying is really true, in the sense that our psyche holds the key to these mysteries. And yet I don't think it's all just within human consciousness. That I do think that these are realities that we're now, entering, that it's not all just an archetypal, an archetype within human consciousness. So that's where my clinical work has been invaluable. I can't afford to be just an armchair philosopher at this point. When you work with people individually, you know, you get a more complete sense of, how do you tell the difference between what's out there versus what's inside?
Totally. I mean, one of the reasons I first came across your work was we're both members of the International Association of Near-Death Studies, and indeed we both had papers published in the journal. And one of the paper you wrote on the quantum mechanical analysis of the Panoramic Life Review, I read that and I was bouncing up and down with excitement, because if you get hold of my first book, Is There Life After Death, one of the major areas of that book is the Panoramic Life Review. And your quantum dynamic model, because effectively I'm heavily interested in the work of Hamerhoff and Penrose and the microtubule argument, and you tick all these boxes in the most profound way. So for a few minutes, can you just talk about your analysis of the Panoramic Life Review and how you see it in that wonderful paper that both you guys wrote? I know it wasn't just you on your own, it was you and your partner, or you and your husband. But a terrific paper. So maybe if you could explain a little bit about that to the listeners, because I'm sure they will find it as fascinating as I did.
You know what? And I'm looking over at my partner just now and saying to him, do you want to take this question? And he's shaking his head. We're like, oh boy, you know, at that period, so I forget when that was authored. In that period of our life, we wanted to take things within the fields of neuroscience, right? And physics, right, and apply them to these mysterious realms like the near-death experience, and how could somebody possibly I remember everything that's happened to them and see it from the different perspective, not just their own personal, but from somebody that it was happening to, which, by the way, is something Haley touched on in our last interview, is that she's becoming more and more empathic and can readily now pick up something from someone who's sitting with her, right? Which is one of the things that these encounters have engendered within herself. But we wanted to provide a scientific explanation for how these things can happen. The near-death life review, and we looked at quantum phenomenon and something like the 0-point field as a repository for all experience. Now, you know, within the spiritual traditions, we talk about things like the Akashic records, right? Well, in physics, they're talking about the 0-point field, the quantum vacuum. And so we looked at some of the dynamics that could possibly explain this, that it isn't just within an individual human brain that the repository of all experience is held. Okay? And so we had fun with that, and it's theoretical. But and my partner Thomas Beck spearheaded that, because he's more into energy generation now, and into physics. And so this is another example of how we need to bridge these fields. at the time we wrote it, there was a great in psychology, there was a lot about false memories, and it was being held that we couldn't remember anything accurately, more or less, that all of our memories were prone to confabulation, and that the brain was not capable of it. And so we wanted to approach it head on and look at advances within physics and show, and within neuroscience, that could show that some of the things that you could think would be impossible could actually happen if you broaden your perspective on consciousness itself. Okay, so consciousness is not just within an individual brain, but that we have access to the field of consciousness outside the individual brain, and we have a connection with that. The brain's kind of like a TV. TV is transmitting, yeah, it's just, huh?
Yeah, we can receive. It's
yeah.
Receiver.
Yeah, we're receiving much more information that we, that the brain is. Wow. Okay. So now, see, I'm relying on him to feed me the words, but you have to do an interview with my partner, Dr. Thomas Beck, and talk about energy and Tesla.
Yeah, I think that's something I'd be fascinated to do as well, because I don't know if you're aware, but my last book was co-authored with Ervin Laszlo. And
yes,
Laszlo
that's
and
fantastically wonderful.
Yeah,
yes,
and Laszlo and
I do. I think that's great.
Yeah, I was amazed when Laszlo approached me, because I said I was so honoured that he wanted to write a book with me, and he turned around and he said, "You're the only person on the planet that could write this book with me." And I thought, wow, that is honour indeed. But I would be more than happy to point out to Ervin that these two guys over in Seattle, that in I think 2003, I think a paper was published, where you were actually doing this. And the 0 point field and 0 point energy and the idea of the collective conscious. Funnily enough, you might be interested to know that one of the earlier interviewees on this show, in this series of shows, was Professor Bernard Heisch, who is working at the 0 point field.
Oh, beautiful! Yes, of course.
Lovely guy.
He's brilliant.
And
brilliant. Yes. Tom has met him. Yeah.
Oh, right. I've interviewed him many times, and we've had long chats on Skype. But it's again this synergy of what's taking place now is quite fascinating. And you guys are joining the dots, and you're actually expanding it out there.
Heisch? Oh, Bernie Heisch. Now, he's on the board of directors for NARCAP, which is the National Aviation Reporting Center for Anomalous Phenomenon. Okay, and so we know. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so that's a NARCAP, NARCAP.
I remember it from my UFO years ago. Yeah, I remember it well.
It's still very functional. He's on the board of directors of that. I'm interviewing some pilots now who have had anomalous aerial phenomenon, and to see, what their integration process has been. Some pilots have been traumatized by it, and others more readily, can move on and expand their conceptual framework. But anyway, so Bernie, yes, he's very good friends with Dick Haynes, who's a NASA ex-scientist who started NARCAP. So anyway, it's a small world. It is a small world when it comes to this level of work, but it's really good to know that you're out there. You hold up the English, you're holding up that corner of the world, right?
Yeah, I find that over here in the UK there is not quite the same interest as there is over in the States, because we're just a little bit more behind you in terms of thinking, although, Roger Penrose, is involved in this work and everything else. But effectively, you know, it's you guys that are pushing the envelope out. Right. Now, I'm aware, I've just been told that we're now past the hour, and it just goes to show, doesn't it, how wonderful when you get chatting and talking, that how it gets beyond anything. So what I would like to do just finally is if you can let the listeners know how they can contact you, because what you're doing is profoundly important. Okay?
Yes.
Yes, this is your new book, isn't it?
Book.
Okay.
Yes, it's with Thomas. The end of Homo sapiens and birth of a new species. So we wanted to take people through the evolutionary process by looking at it within Tom himself and through some of his work with clients. Just look up, you can either just Google my name, Janet Colli, Colli. I have a website that is, I think it's www.janetcolli.com. or www.sacredencounters.com. And then my own book is The Dark Face of Heaven, if you're interested in psychotherapy. And these covers were designed by Will Boucher. I have to say this is because he worked with John Mack. So it's a small world.
It is
indeed. He was John Mack's. Yes. So,
a much missed man, I think, sadly. A much missed man.
I know. Truly, he elevated the field enormously. So
totally.
It's up to us now. We stand on his shoulders, but it is us. So
it is indeed.
It's very good to be here. Thank you for having me on this program.
No, we need to have you back as a guest again, because I think we didn't scratch the surface. And yes, we must have Thomas as a guest as well, because clearly, there's a great deal of synergy. Now, on a personal level, I'd like to talk to both you guys privately anyway, sometime in the next week or so, because my new book, Opening the Doors of Perception, is so much travelling along a very similar line, because I'm redoing the Aldous Huxley idea, taking it forward for the 21st century, and that will be out in the States next March or April, I think. But I need to talk to you, so this was an opening gambit, as it were, for you to know what I'm doing, and for me to understand what you guys are doing as well. And to say I'm excited is an understatement. I think this is a meeting of minds, and it is so important.
Great, wonderful.
Okay, well, thank you again. Wonderful, and thank you, Janet,
you're welcome.
Thank you for Thomas in the background as well. And as always, thank you. Hi, Thomas, and
here. Say hi.
Hi, Thomas. I recognise you from the website. Right, and again, as always, and always thank you again for Dia Nunes over there in Denver, for the person that quietly makes this all happen, bites her nails to the quick, and is the person that just is the Damon to my Eidolon. So thank you very much again, and Janet, thank you very much for being a wonderful guest. We did get over the problems in the end, and it was worth persevering, because it's been a wonderful show. Okay, thank you, and see you soon. I'll speak to you soon. Okay, bye-bye.
Goodbye. Bye.
Bye.